Hello and welcome. My name is Joe O'Mara. I'm the Head of Aviation Finance with KPMG. And on behalf of KPMG and Airline Economics, I'm delighted to be joined by Helane Becker. Helane is a Managing Director with TD COWEN. She is joining us for the purposes of our Aviation Leaders Report 2024. And I should say we're recording this in New York in late October. Helane, thanks for joining us again. Always great to get your insights. Maybe we could lead off with airline performance. We have seen, a strong bounce back in demand and a buoyant market. Can I get your perspectives on how airlines are performing?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the question. I'm laughing almost because the airlines themselves are doing well, but the stock prices are doing really poorly. They are below March 2020 lows, which I find amazing given how well they've recovered. And that's it, isn't it? The airlines have done really well, especially in North America. It's been leading. What we have seen over the past, say, 3 years has been a predictable recovery in the sense that once people or you felt comfortable going to a restaurant in your neighborhood for dinner, you started to feel comfortable traveling. And we saw that you would travel domestically, locally, regionally, internationally. And this summer, we saw very strong demand on the North Atlantic as people were looking to either recreate experiences they had pre-pandemic or just had so much pent-up demand for not having been able to travel for so long that they really wanted to. So you saw very strong demand. And then Asia Pacific is the last to recover. So we kind of think 2021 and 2 was more about domestic markets, and that's true North America, it was true in Europe, it was true locally in Asia, although it was slower to recover. And then we had this 22 and 23 international. 23, 24 will be very strong Atlantic with recovering Pacific, and then 25 is probably the first year where we get whatever new normal is, a normalized, balanced travel year.
Just hone in one piece and geopolitically get your thoughts. We've seen probably China's been a challenging market, and your thoughts on lessors in China. I know you would cover the large list of lessors, and they seem to be making some noises about reducing their Chinese exposure. Is that a trend line you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. We've seen that happen over the past couple of years, and especially since Russia invaded Ukraine. The way the lessors are pricing in-country risk has changed. And so, yes, to your point, we're seeing them reducing that exposure. And if you go back and look at their public documents, because they all borrow publicly, so most of the lessors, even though we write on and keep earnings models on the publicly traded ones, the equity markets, we also read the Q's and the K's of everybody else, because they're all raising money in the capital markets. And yes, if you look, and they all disclose the percentage of their aircraft in either Asia or Asia Pacific, ex-China, China, North America, South America, et cetera. And we've seen that trend shift away from China as they've looked at other markets.
And maybe moving on to the supply side challenges that we've seen. So if we have a buoyant market out there from a travel perspective, as you mentioned, differences in geographic, but all trending probably in a positive fashion. One challenge has been accessing metal, and in assessing the impact that's having on either lessors or airlines. Can you talk to us about what challenges that's bringing to the market?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we've seen aircraft that should have been built not being built, right? I've seen numbers anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 aircraft that should have been built between 2018 and 2023 that just aren't being built and will never be built. Because obviously if you had a delivery that should have been in 2018 and you don't get it until 2026, you would have thought about a replacement aircraft in 2020 I don't know, 28, maybe 2032, you would have started thinking about what you do, and you're not gonna do that now, right? And the challenge is growth. What we're seeing this in a lot of different markets. We're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in North America. I don't know the Asian market as well as I know the other two, but we've seen that trend because especially the lower cost Asian airlines have big order books, and they're not getting their aircraft either. But one of the big things that we're seeing in terms of metal is that the airlines are thinking more seats per departure and fewer departures per day. And that's a trend we've been talking about for the past 4 or 5 years. And now the airlines are starting to talk about it. And you see it in the New York area. You're based in Ireland, right, in Dublin. So you won't see it here, but I see it because I fly in and out of Newark a lot, and we have fewer flights, but the aircraft we do have are bigger. And that's an important trend, because when you look at the lessor order books, they don't have a lot of wide-body aircraft on order. They're thinking maybe the A321XLR or EOW as their aircraft of choice for the 6-hour transatlantic kind of flights.
Yeah, it's interesting. So whether people pivot more into an A350, perhaps, right, and some lessors are probably dipping their toe in that market, you say it's not where the key focus is. Sticking maybe on the equipment side, the other key challenge out there is engines, and we have had a lot of chat recently on the GTF issues.
Mm-hmm.
They're not alone in those issues. What impact are you seeing the engine challenges start to have, or are you expecting it to have on an airline or lessor perspective?
Well, the airline part is very concerning. The lessor part as well. I mean, obviously, Raytheon has said that they were putting away, I think it was $6 billion to compensate airlines and lessors for the aircraft that will be parked. It doesn't come under, from what I understand, it doesn't come under business interruption insurance. So even though the airlines will get compensated, it won't make up for the fact that they're losing revenue and they have the fixed cost of the aircraft. Hawaiian Airlines, I was looking at that specifically the other day. They've got 6 or 7 aircraft parked. Spirit has 6 or 7 aircraft parked. And it's taking 250 to 300 days for the aircraft to come out of their inspection process. I find that astonishing and frightening, because it puts pressure on everybody's margins. And that's really problematic. And it just pressures earnings, it pressures the outlook, pressures capacity. It argues for higher ticket prices to discourage that demand, and the aircraft have to go in fairly rapidly, right? For an airline like Spirit, their aircraft have to go in. Well, they all have to go in at 2,500 takeoffs and landings. So an airline like Spirit's got to get there in about 2 years, 2.5 years. An airline like Hawaiian, they get there in 2.5 or 3 years. So it's not like this problem is going away very speedily, and there aren't enough worker bees, there's not enough supply, the parts are missing. Then what do? Do they repair the engines on the ground, or they deliver, the OEMs are pressing them to deliver the new engines to them so they can deliver aircraft? So it's really a scrum fest. It's really, it just all feeds into why the industry seemingly is doing really well, but it's not reflected in equity markets around the world.
Yeah, so it's capacity constraints, that ability to grow. You mentioned maybe less so on the lessor side. What are the lessors saying about the engine challenges?
Pretty much the same thing. They're frustrated. I mean, they're frustrated. Their frustration goes back to the OEM delivery delays to begin with. And once the aircraft is out on a lease, it's really the airline that's responsible for the maintenance. But obviously, if you have a non-performing asset, do you really want to pay your monthly lease rate? And why should you pay pre-delivery deposits to a lessor? I mean, delivery to hold your spot. if there's no performance. So it's, I think, really frustrating for everyone. And it also will limit earnings growth, net income growth, because your revenues are impacted. If you're not getting your aircraft from the OEMs because they're doing, maybe one or two new aircraft to one leased aircraft or one aircraft in service that they have to fix. It's going to pressure everybody's margins. It pressures your sales because you're going to hold on to your aircraft longer. Airlines are looking for aircraft in the used market as they're coming off lease. They're being scooped up, which would never have happened. Airlines would never have bought 14-year-old aircraft in the past, and you're seeing that happen because they need the capacity and they know this issue is not going away for a long time. It's something like 650 engines, and then you kind of multiply out the concern and how many years it takes.
Yeah, it's just as you say, just leads like capacity constraints is going to hinder growth. It can't not hinder growth. And another challenge I guess we've seen really accelerate over the last 12 months is around the interest rate environment.
Mm-hmm.
We all knew that zero interest rates would last forever, that they would go up. But I guess the pace and scale of change has been a bit of a whiplash for the entire sector. Can you talk about how that heightened rate environment is impacting on airlines and lessors?
Yeah, so two different sectors, but impacting similarly. So for the airlines, they have had very low cost of capital for the past decade and a half, right? At least coming out of the Great Recession. And the result has been really interesting to me. So you saw an airline like American refleet in the 2013, 2014, 2019 timeframe. They spent $25 billion. Average cost of capital was around 3%, maybe a little less. Now United has got a $60 billion 10-year CapEx program. I mean, it sounds like a lot, and they spent $8 billion this year, and they're going to spend $8 billion next year and the year after. But over the 10 years, it's only $6 billion a year. For a $50 billion revenue company, that's probably right.
Yeah.
But their cost of capital is going to be closer to 6 or 7%. And before he retired, Jerry Latterman told me that they've financed aircraft at higher rates, so they're not concerned about it. But what it does is pressure margins, and it argues for higher ticket prices to cover all the costs that we've talked about: maintenance, fuel, labor costs have gone up. So that's been, I think that's been concerning from my perspective, because it just means that pre-tax margins come under pressure. For the lessors, it's a little different. I know that, I'm going to put air quotes around, everybody is concerned about higher rates, but pragmatically on the new aircraft, when an airline signs an agreement with a leasing company, they don't specify the rate. They specify a benchmark plus some amount over that benchmark that would theoretically cover their cost of capital. And the lessors always borrow unsecured rather. So the fact that they're borrowing unsecured is a major advantage, because they don't have to borrow a year or two in advance. They borrow a few months in advance. They can warehouse the capital while they're waiting to deliver out an aircraft, and they can cover that higher rates easier, maybe not easily, but easier. But where they might get caught out is an aircraft coming off a lease, where their cost of capital has gone up, but the lease rate is going to go down or stay the same, and that could pressure their margins. And I know that's what people are concerned about.
Yeah, it's kind of how they've stacked the liability side, isn't it? You would like to think that their refinancing is spread over a number of years and reflected maybe the lease terms that they've committed to. But you would give you some pause for thought if we stay in this type of environment. Will we see distress on the lessor side potentially? Right? I don't know if that's something you thought about.
I think that we always think of, I don't know if I've thought about it that way, but I mean, I always think about the what's next, because the market always asks, it's always looking 6 months ahead. So we're always trying to think that way. And I think from the lessor perspective, the concern is more that they won't be able to recover their their that they won't be able to recover their cost of capital in a new lease rate in an environment where there are all these delays and everybody wants a better deal.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, no, I think it did. Like if you have a lease encumbered asset that you committed on a lease rate factor for an 8-year deal, but your debt term is 4, right? You're going to have that imbalance and challenge. Maybe pivoting a little bit around the investor side. Aviation has had its challenges over the last few years. Someone said, "That's a black swan." Well, it's another black swan. It's another black swan, right? Your thoughts around its attractiveness as an asset class, and that's either looking at, you mentioned the share price piece for airlines. We've got the 2 listed lessors continually, trading below book, right? Your thoughts on the attractiveness of aviation as an asset class?
I think that's a great question. I think it helps to be big, first of all, because you get the first call. I think where distress comes in is being smaller. And when you think about what planes are the right planes, right? I mean, right? So when I think about leasing, I think about it as a library for aircraft. I check a plane out when I need it, I check it back in when I don't. And if I'm a leasing company, I have to have some aircraft on the shelf available for an airline that wants it. So I have to price accordingly, but I don't want to leave too many aircraft on the shelf because I won't earn my returns. And then I think of them, to your question, as a portfolio manager for assets. Only instead of determining, where do I want to put my money, what percent in India, what percent in Brazil or emerging markets as a group, what percent in Europe, what percent in bonds in North America, and so on. I think about it as aircraft. Like I'm managing my portfolio with aircraft. And as an asset class, I think you have to really know what you're doing and you have to be in the right aircraft type. Think about it this way, for years, lessors shied away from freighters. And now in the past couple of years, because freight demand was so strong during the pandemic, they all, which is no overstatement, piled into freighters. And now we're in an environment where passenger aircraft have come back, you have a lot of belly capacity and freighters are less in demand. August was the first month where FedEx and UPS flew more flights than they had earlier in the year because they had been cutting capacity because demand was relatively weak. So you have to be in the right plane. You have to be in the right asset. I think as an asset class, it's not unattractive, but it wouldn't be my first choice.
Yeah.
And I think you really have to know what you're doing. And there are not a lot of people who got involved in aviation in the last few years, maybe the last decade, who really know what they're doing.
And maybe honing out leasing for a moment then, we've seen the percentage of leased aircraft, if you look at it on a long-term basis, it's kind of just gradually ticked upwards. And we saw an acceleration of that through COVID with the airline distress and balance sheets, probably funding north of 50-55% of new deliveries over the last couple of years. Do you see that trend line continuing? Or if we're in a situation where airlines are generating lots of cash, they might step back a bit from that lease percentage? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Joe, I think you've asked me this question before. So here's what I think about it. I don't think airlines should ever own aircraft. I understand why they do, but I don't think it makes sense. I think they should let the leasing companies use their balance sheets to own aircraft and move them around as needed. The reason airlines own them is because they're going to fly them somewhere between 18 and 30 years or more, right? So they do own them. But every aircraft has a mission, and knowing what your mission is really important. And for the leasing companies, I have always thought of this as a pyramid, where the bottom of the pyramid is your narrow body aircraft, because you have your most customers and you can move aircraft around easily. And then as you go up to the top of the pyramid where your freighters are and you only have 20 customers for it, the leasing companies fall off. And I think this being in that sweet spot,
Mass market effectively, yeah.
really makes the most sense for leasing companies.
But do you think there is a chance that, you see it a bit, I think I looked at the AirCap last year, it's called, in reference, they used to sell 20% of their disposals were to airlines, and that's kind of seemed to tick up.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Is that a potential trend that we will see?
I don't know how much more we can go beyond 55%. I think that's where we are now, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I know there are some folks like me. I think we should be over 60%. But I understand why we probably won't get there, because all the tier 1 airlines will always want to own their own aircraft, and they might do sale leasebacks from time to time, but they want control. They're going to fly them a long time, so they're always going to look for the lowest cost of capital way to finance aircraft, and it's probably not through the leasing market. When you get to tier 2 and the tier 3 airlines, they get to fly brand new aircraft and at a reasonable cost. For the leasing companies, they get to mark those up a little bit to make yield.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, if you think about ESG, which is looming large and really important, we're only 27 years away. I know that sounds ridiculous, but we're only 27 years away from 2050, and all the aircraft that are being ordered for delivery between 2028 and 2035 are going to still be flying, and we're going to need more fuel efficient aircraft, and so when you think about the leasing percentage of that, it argues for them to use their balance sheet to enable the world, again, air quotes, to get to that level.
Yeah, maybe honing in on that ESG point. Just curious, there's a lot of talk about it. So clearly, we come to the conferences we attend. It is spoken about. I sometimes feel it's lip service, right?
Yeah.
And I do wonder, how is it really impacting airlines and lessors currently? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. I don't think it's impacting the lessors as much as it's impacting the airlines. I was, at the beginning of October, I attended IATA's First World Sustainability Symposium in Madrid, and it was fascinating to listen to everybody speak, because it was a very different group of presenters and panelists and attendees. It was people who provide sustainable aviation fuel, engine manufacturers, people who run sustainability. So for airlines, it was a very different group. And here's what I think about that. It's very hard to mandate something that's not there. Everybody wants sustainable aviation fuel, but it's not reasonable. It's not a reasonable price. It takes, we need today 300 facilities to manufacture SAF. And it takes probably 5 to 8 years at least to get a facility in place because of the permitting process, the environmental studies, and then building it. And as time goes on, maybe it gets easier once there's a lot of experience in building the first couple. But the only way in the short term is to provide as much SAF as possible, because that's the short-term solution. All the other solutions, when you think about eVTOL, when you think about hybrid aircraft, electric aircraft, these aircraft aren't flying 300 people between Chicago and Frankfurt. That's not their mission, or between London and Dubai, or London and Tokyo. That's not what those aircraft are designed to do. Most of them, in the short term, are designed to be ground replacement vehicles. So I don't know how we get there from here with the aircraft side, but I've been covering this industry. I always say this for ever, my whole life it seems like. And when I first started, I was talking about 3 crewed, 3 engine aircraft going to 2 crewed, 2 engine aircraft. And over that time frame, that 100 billion gallons of jet fuel that the industry uses worldwide has not really changed. And that's because the engines have gotten more efficient. And I think that's a big part of it. It's more efficient engines. It's growing the ability to generate SAF. The fact that every airline, in the world practically has an arrangement with some provider of SAF says to you, should say to the market, if you build it, we will come. We're here to buy it. We're just not paying $10 a gallon for it. And we need it, and we need it as speedily as possible. And I think that will drive a big part of it. But whether we get, it was interesting in Madrid, what I kept hearing was aspirational. It was it's at 2050 to get to net zero carbon emissions is aspirational, as opposed to what we were hearing before as that's the line in the sand. And
red lines become dotted lines.
yeah, and the other thing, Joe, that's amazed me too is I thought with the pandemic everybody would get derailed and people would be so focused on survivability as an airline company that they wouldn't, and as a lessor, that they wouldn't even think about and the whole idea of 2050 and the CORSIA goals and so on. And yet that didn't happen. It became more of a focus in the last 3 or 4 years, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, prior to 2018, nobody really cared about ESG, nobody talked about it, and then all of a sudden, it's in every conference. There's at least one panel talking about ESG, and it's been the case since I want to say really since 2018 or 19.
Yeah, no easy fixes clearly. Just in closing, Helane, as we look out, as I say, we're in October, you're looking at over the next 12 months. What are your optimism levels like for the sector?
I feel like our conversation is always so negative. I always try to end. I always try to end on a positive note, but it's kind of interesting. You said something to earlier in our discussion about there's always a black swan event. There's always something unpredictable that occurs, like every couple of years, every year. And for the whole time I've covered this group, it's been down and to the right as opposed to up and to the right. The lows have gotten lower and lower. For the next year and a half, I really think that demand will continue to be reasonably strong. I think the way people travel will change again. I don't think corporate travel will come back to what it was pre-pandemic, just like after the events of 9/11 in the United States, it didn't come back on short haul trips. You can't go in the morning. You can't guarantee yourself that if I go in the morning, I can come home tonight, right? If I have a few meetings in Boston, and I take the 7 a.m. flight, there's no guarantee I'm going to be on the 7 p.m. flight because there's no guarantee that flight's going to go. And I think that argues for more judicious planning on the corporate side. The idea of how important is that meeting, or are those meetings? And if I only have one meeting, isn't it easier to do it by Zoom? So I think corporate comes back, managed corporate. I think small and medium-sized businesses never really stop traveling. So we're really positive on those folks, and we're positive on the 90% coming back. For leisure travel, it's getting increasingly difficult to take your kids out of school on Wednesday, or travel Wednesday to Sunday or Saturday to Tuesday because school's back in 5 days a week, and your boss wants you back at least 4 days a week, right? I feel like 4 is the new 3. When we were coming out of the pandemic, it was 1 or 2 days, it was 2 or 3 days, now it's 4 days, which makes weekend travel harder again. And so I think you're going to see the leisure mix shift again. I think for international, we're going to see stronger Asia Pacific, weaker Atlantic, not because I think demand's going to decline a lot, but I think there's a lot of new capacity going in the market. We know United, for example, they've increased capacity a lot in the Atlantic. They're kind of pivoting to Pacific, but BA, Lufthansa, American, Delta, all announced, Norwegian, all announced big increases on the North Atlantic for IATA summer next summer. And that says to me, that's wonderful news from a consumer perspective because fares will come down. And I think that's a good thing because demand will remain strong. But I think not forever, especially if there's a recession. Yikes, anywhere.
We're going to keep it optimistic, Helane.
Keep positive.
Well, listen, on behalf of KPMG and Air Economics, I'd like to thank you for your time again and wish you and TD Cowen a very successful 2024.
Thanks, Joe. It's always good to be here.